I want to invite Judy to take us through the next step. Before she comes, the first session was too formal, isn't it? Jamie says, time to kick off your shoes. And I suggest that you also take a selfie with your neighbor. Please get your phone. Please get your phone. It's a nice, you look amazing. A very nice opportunity for you to also get a phone number. Please get your phone. Yes, and take a selfie with your neighbor. I am waiting for that. Thank you very much. You guys are so much fun. So much fun. Jamie doesn't have anybody. Let me see who can take a beautiful selfie. Oh, amazing. Let me see that. Let me see that. Now you have it. Oh, you're my neighbor. Let me see. Paddy, hi. Let's see cheese. Chapati, cheese, whatever works. Ugali. All right. Sukuma wiki. There's so many options, you know. Aha. Mr. Gadinji missed out on the selfie. Jamie, you have to help him out now. The selfie. We were taking a selfie to get everybody relaxed a bit. All right. Anne is almost done. Thank you. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for indulging me. Yes. Good. So I hope you're all comfortable now. You can remove the tie now, Boris, you know. Yeah, over to you, Judy. Yes, yes, yes. Yes.
From the seat, yes, Jamie, from the seat. Thank you very much. I think we wanted to have a very brief introduction of ourselves. We did this deliberately. We wanted to have at least to lay the foundation, you know, the climate setting, and then when you're all relaxed, we can now begin the introductions. We will start from my left. Yeah? From myself. Okay, thank you very much. You have saved her. That's clockwise. It's anti-clockwise. So maybe I'll start with myself, Judy Oduma, currently the team leader for the Kenya Devolution Program. In Kenya, we have a devolution program running. It's fully funded by the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, that is the British High Commission, running until next year, 2025. It's implemented by Act Change Transform. I think it's a locally created organization. So very, very happy to be here, but very, very happy that this has happened, that we finally have convened this session. And I'm from Kenya.
We use this one? Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Nicholas Awatri. I'm the director of the Institute of Local Government Studies in Ghana. I think this year by September will become a university of local governance and development. We have both postgraduate and undergraduate programs, and also provide professional training for all local government officers in Ghana. I'm happy to be here, and I'm part of the Public Sector Alliance as advisory board member. Thanks so much.
Sorry, what I didn't say is that I'm also part and parcel of the LPSA and the capacity of the co-chair Sub-Saharan Africa, together with my colleague Yap and Ka, I think was unable to come.
Okay, hello everyone. This is Katama from Addis Ababa University. I am currently the director of the Center for Federalism and Governance Studies in the College of Law and Governance. I do teach urban local governance courses and courses related to intergovernmental relations. And I'm happy to be here. And this is for the first time that I'm involved in this setting. Looking forward for insightful exchanges of ideas and policy solutions in relation to decentralization and multi-level governance. Thanks so much. Next.
I've already introduced myself, so over to Henry.
Hello, everyone. My name is Henry Paul Gichana. I currently lead Katiba Institute's devolution work, but I also currently assist Professor Yab Davisa in coordinating the hosting of the African School on Decentralization. I've also been a student at his institute previously. I did my PhD at the Dalla Omar Institute, where he was still a director. Yes, I'm very excited about the African agenda on decentralization, and very curious to see what we can be able to do in terms of moving the agenda forward. Thank you.
So good morning, everyone. Once again, my name is Gertrude Rose Gamweda, and I'm the Secretary General for the East African, now we add County and Local Governments Association, and we're based in Arusha, Tanzania. We are an umbrella body that brings together the national chapters in every member states of the East African. And in Kenya here, we work closely with the Council of Governors of Kenya and the County Assemblies Forum. But what's also unique to us is we also have a platform where we meet with our ministries of local government, which we call the East African Local Government Forum. And this helps us to coordinate our efforts of advocacy and positioning our voice at regional level. The main mandate really for YELGA is to make sure that apart from representing the interests of local governments and building capacity, is to make sure that we are visible within the ESC business, the integration agenda. The treaty is silent about us, so we're doing quite a lot of work to make sure that they're brought onto the decision-making table in the ESC. And we are proud of the fact that one key milestone is now we have a solid memorandum of understanding to work in partnership with the ESC. So that is opening doors for engagements and discussions and involvement of representatives at the ESC level. But I also coordinate the Commonwealth Local Government Forum East Africa Region Office. So any business with the Commonwealth Local Government Forum, please feel free to contact us at our headquarters. And I also work with the Strong Cities Network. It is a network of cities. It's a global network of over 260 cities. And the main focus is working around elevating the voice of mayors and leaders in addressing and prevention issues around hate, extremism, and polarization. And we've been doing that for the last 1.5 years. So we host the hub as YELGA in Arusha as well. So that's quite a bit of what we do. And it's exciting to be part of this discussion. I'm a proud alumni of the African School of Decentralization. Very good program there. So yes, can't wait to learn more from this room and take it forward in my work. Thank you.
Hello everyone. My name is Steve Ogutu. I serve as the Executive Director for the Movement for Community-Led Development and also the East African Coordinator. We are a global alliance of civil society organizations that are really championing the localization of SDGs in Kenya and in other parts of Africa. We are involved in strengthening local governance. One of our flagship initiatives in Kenya is the School for Devolution and Community-Led Development, which we launched last year in partnership with one of our partner county governments, which is Makueni County Government. And it's really exciting to see the kind of the distinguished actors that are here today, and looking forward to just engage some more throughout the workshop and see how we can collaborate some more to make localization work and devolution work for all. Thank you.
Good morning, dear colleagues. I am Augustine Magolowondo. I am Regional Director at Democracy Works Foundation. That's a Southern Africa foundation that covers a number of countries in that region, seeking to contribute to the growth of what we call inclusive and resilient democracies, which also looks at strengthening local level democracies. Our work is cutting across a number of areas, including strengthening institutions of political parties, parliaments, and also local governance in Angola, and a bit of that in South Africa, where we have our climate governance initiative. And it's very exciting to be here. Here I am particularly present as co-chair of the Local Democracy and Inclusive Governance Working Group. It's a thematic working group of LOPSA. And it's actually a very exciting opportunity because this is indeed the first time that we have an opportunity of meeting in person with some of the people that we've engaged, and looking forward to seeing how we can, have better harmonization and coordination across thematic and regional working groups, so that at the end of the day, really, we can not just elevate, but deepen the debate on local governance. So quite excited.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. My name is Avril Vandel. I work with UN Habitat on local finance. We particularly look at approaches to optimize own source revenue, working with local governments. I recently joined Habitat. Prior to that, I worked in public policy with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs in Ontario, Canada, working with their local government division, looking at who does what, who pays for what with respect to local service delivery. So this is very interesting to me. It's a different context, but many similar issues. So I'm happy to be here and thank you very much.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Sylvia Murunga. I am a researcher and a lecturer at Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology, and my area of expertise is in environment, water, sanitation, and hygiene. And I'm also a technical working group member of Women Economic Empowerment, LAPSA. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Anne Amin. I work with UN Habitat as well. I'm currently leading the work on legislation and governance for the policy legislation and governance section, and very pleased to be here. I think there's a huge amount of wealth of knowledge here and look forward to the exchanges. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Gerhard van het Land. I'm a Dutch citizen. I'm based in Nairobi, and over the last 25 years, I have been working as a consultant in the field of local governance, decentralization, and performance-based grants.
Hello, everyone. So, Martino Miraglia, and I coordinate UN Habitat's team on SDG localization, local governments, and the SDG Cities flagship program, which is one of the flagships, 5 flagships of UN Habitat. So this is the 3rd team of UN Habitat being represented. Thanks for bringing us together, I would say. Just for you to say, for you to know the team here. So we do coordinate programmatic, technical, but also political engagement around the localization of the SDGs within the agency. And we are kind of trying, at least, because there are a lot of colleagues working with the local and regional governments associations. So we do coordinate the political engagement with the associations on our corporate events and advocacy processes. And yes, thanks, and looking forward to the discussion today.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Nick Travis. I'm an independent researcher and consultant working mostly on public finance issues and decentralization. And one of the hats that I wear is working with the LPSA Secretariat, specifically supporting the development and the rollout of the tools and the methodologies that we'll discuss later on, particularly in the Africa and Asia regions. And I've been working with LPSA in that capacity for about 2 years now. So it's great to meet you all and have the opportunity to discuss these issues over the next few days. Looking forward to a good conversation. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Boris Tannhauser. I'm the director of Platforma, which is a European network of cities and regions and their associations which are active in international cooperation between cities, so city-to-city cooperation, region-to-region cooperation. We're basically a brand of CMR, Council of European Municipalities and Regions, that is the umbrella organization for local regional governments in Europe, gathering national associations that are in every country in Europe. What we do in Platforma is we're basically looking to 3 main things, especially internationalization. That means cities and regions becoming more international in the global world. We are dealing with what we call global agendas for local regional governments. That means though international agreements, commitments, discussions that are relevant for local regional governments, obviously the 2030 agenda, SDGs and their localization, Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, or the Addis Ababa action agenda for financing for development. So that's our remits. And in terms of European remits, we work especially on knowledge, peer learning, capacity building, but also policy and advocacy towards the European Union, the European Commission, and the legislative framework. But also we work with the Council of Europe, which is a body distinct from the EU, where the Council of Europe adopted a specific international agreement, which is called European Charter of Local Self-Government. And I will speak a little bit about that, what is the experience of our local governments, national associations with this instrument.
It's always nice to speak last because then you say less. My name is Paddy Sianga Knudsen, but we can just call me Paddy because it's a mouthful of names. I'm quite excited to be here because I think for most of my being a member of the sub-working group for on LPSA has been on a virtual screen. So it's really nice to put faces and to meet colleagues, but also having support and now moving on to support some of the work stream on gender as well. So that's sort of my connection. Professionally, I'm a development economist from Zambia by passport, but I've worked in Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, and also supporting some of the work in Francophone Africa as a consultant and as a researcher. And really excited about having this Pan-African agenda as a safe space, but also a space that allows us to pour, I think, the different ideas into how this network and platform can actually be very useful and instrumental in driving forward the decentralization agenda. I work predominantly on fiscal decentralization, but very much willing to learn more about other spaces as well. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alice Malonte. I come from Cameroon. I work as a consultant in leadership and management at Strategies, which is a consulting firm. Our CEO is Kawala, so I'm representing her. She's also one of the SSA co-chairs. So our company has been supporting local governments in Cameroon since the 90s when decentralization was launched in Cameroon. So now we are working mostly on two concepts. The first one is improving the functionality of local governments. And also we are working on transforming African markets so that we have more participatory management, inclusivity, and also waste management. I am very glad to be here and I hope I will learn more from your countries. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Anki Delnes, and I'm a senior governance advisor with UNDP.
It was very short, Anki. Thank you. Thank you very much. To the point. Thank you very much. I think we also should recognize, we know we have colleagues who really would have wanted to be here, but because of other constraints, we couldn't have them in the room. But I think they're following us very keenly online. So recognize you. We might not really be able to allow each and everyone to introduce themselves, but I think allow us to begin. But remember, we'll have opportunity to ask questions, to make comments, even when you're online, and just make your contribution. So I'd like now at this point, so that we don't waste a lot of time, to introduce or to actually welcome Jackie to now introduce the next session.
Thank you. I think I will be very brief because of time. But I think we are all decentralization advocates, and we believe that the challenges that we are facing, the global challenges that we are facing, issues of equity, issues of conflict, issues of access to public services. They're so big and they're so at such a scale that no individual stakeholder can address them, not just no one government level can address them. That there's need for collaboration, there's need for multi-level governance, and there's need for decentralization. But even as we advocate for decentralization and multi-level governance, it is important that we agree or have a discussion on why are we advocating, you know, because how we advocate is also linked to why we are advocating. So in this session, we will explore three main potential motivators for disrupting centralized multi-level governance systems. And the first motivator that we're going to be looking at is decentralization as a mechanism to promote democracy and inclusive and responsive governance. And we have Yap to share on that. We also have the second motivator that we should be looking at is decentralization as a way to empower cities and regions as engines for national economic growth. We have Professor Nicholas, who's going to be sharing a bit on that. And we are lucky we have also Anne Amin, who is going to be focusing on the localization of public services and development outcomes as a way to achieve inclusive and effective development. So it's going to be, they're going to make some remarks, but then it's going to be really a discussion for us to agree what are the key things that, what are the primary motivators, what are there motivators that provide a stronger argument for disrupting centralized systems. So it's really going to be a discussion. Feel free to air your opinions, your perspectives, your thoughts as we go ahead. And hopefully by the end of this session, we will have some recommendations, particularly for the, if we are to set up a Pan-African network of decentralization advocates, what should the Pan-African network be focusing on or be looking at? So I will invite Yap Deviser to go ahead.
And Jackson pointed out, this very fine device we get today, how much shall we get? 6 minutes, 7 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes? You're too kind. And we can choose the melody and play. I think we just have to alarm clock. Whoever runs overtime too much will buy the alcohol too much. But you know, we're not for profit cannot pay for wine and beer. So, but obviously this is just to remind ourselves that we want to be fine at the end after the three kind of council. We'll have a discussion. Everyone will contribute for that. Otherwise, Professor and myself, Professor, I know how it goes. Right? Give a preacher the microphone, you would get a sermon.
That's right. Yeah.
This is for everyone's sake.
Here we go. The clock is ticking. All right. So I have the the duty and the privilege to kick off this sort of format of discussing issues leading up to sort of a plan of action going forward. I decided I'm not going to break my own rule, so I'm not going to come with 30 PowerPoint slides, but just one, and one slide is allowed. So, and really the aim of my input is not to, I don't think I'm going to be telling you anything new, because we are all experts in decentralization. We've heard all these things before. They are not new to us. But it is picking up from what Judy mentioned about, if we want to motivate, if we want to lobby and advocate for decentralization, multi-level government, devolution, on the basis of what? Because too easily we use the truisms, government closest to the citizens, full stop. But what does that really mean? Because, somebody told me, right now, I feel very, very close to Amazon. That's really close to me. But it's, what is proximity? What does that mean nowadays? It's just one way of challenging that sort of truism of government closest to the citizen. We need to unpack. Why is it that we want to motivate for sound decentralization? So I put a few pointers on the screen, and there are many more, and they can all be challenged, and you know, it's just to open up a discussion on that so that we can be clear, hopefully at the end, on why we do this. And I took it from the fact sheets on decentralization in Africa, which a part of it was made part of your pack, which is a set of, you know, very basic notions that we at the Dalla Omar Institute, we decided to unpack in 10 fact sheets, unpacking various elements of decentralization, ranging from democracy to fiscal, traditional leadership, motivators for decentralization, and a range of other, you know, basic concepts unpacked, hopefully in accessible language. It's now also been translated into French, Portuguese, and Arabic. And we're working on Spanish so that we also do not leave out Equatorial Guinea, which I think is the only country where Spanish is the lingua franca. But yeah, it's really doing its rounds as hopefully a useful a document to just unpack some of these basic notions. So I'm using that fact sheet number 3. So what are the motivators for decentralization that we've seen, that we've witnessed, that we've experienced on the African continent? First, the one to mention is conflict resolution. And, you know, that may not always be the main driver of decentralization, but quite often it plays a significant role. For example, where I come from, South Africa, very crudely put, during our transition, the African National Congress and the other liberation movements wanted a strong central government. The outgoing National Party apartheid government knew that its days were numbered and wanted federalism. They wanted strong provinces. The same for the Inkatha Freedom Party, which had a much more ethnic motivator, wanted the Kingdom of KwaZulu to be recognized. So that became a very contested issue during the transition, also resulted in extreme violence. And out of that sort of came a compromise, which said, okay, let's have weak provinces to accommodate those who really want a strong regional level. But let's then have strong local government, because local government is sort of the level of government that most negotiators were the least worried about. Not a threat to nationhood, to nation building. So local government was then boosted as a very strong sphere of government in the South African Constitution. This is one example of how conflict can play a role in decentralization. If you look at local government in Ethiopia, and Katema will correct me, the way local government in Ethiopia is structured is a specific recognition for ethnic groups to establish their own form of local government. So that's another way in which conflict management of diversity can influence, can be a motivator for a certain form of devolution or decentralization. Then, of course, the much more, I think, well-trodden one is a demand for local services, demand for local democracy. When there is, and we've seen that across the continent, when there's agitation in civil society, opposition parties, opponents of a ruling party or a ruling movement saying, we want more control over local services, we want more control over local finances, we want more finances to flow to regions other than the capital city. We demand local democracy. We want to elect our local leaders. We don't want them to be imposed on us by the center. We've seen that kind of momentum in various countries. I mean, I would like to believe, but then again, those who are from Zambia must correct me, that that was partly the reason for Zambia choosing to include devolution in its constitution. It was a movement, a civil society-led movement that wanted devolution included in the constitution. And thirdly, more effective public spending. It's a bit more of an economist's argument, and I'm really on dangerous territory here as a lawyer, because there's lots of economists here who will challenge me on how I explain it. But the idea really is, if you have a national government that has a pot of money, it has to decide what to do with that pot of money. What it can do, it can ask its citizens, what should it do with that money? And if there's two communities, the one community says we want roads, the other community says we want education, what national government will do is neatly divide it all up, even it out, so that everybody gets a bit of roads and a bit of education. So nobody's unhappy, but nobody's quite happy either. In a devolved system, you take that same pot of money, and instead of national government deciding what to do with it, say, we're going to give it to those two communities, and they can decide for themselves what to do with it. So the one community spends it on roads, and the other community spends it on education. So, you know, the logic is they are then perfectly happy because they both can make the choices that they want with the money that is made available to them. Of course, that's a very crude explanation of the allocative fiscal theory. But the idea, I think, is really to improve the responsiveness of decision-making on public finances by making decision-making closer to the recipients. Fourthly, creativity and innovation. That, for me, is a very important one. And it's something that I think is really important for, especially for the African continent. Policy making, policy decision making is not linear. It's not constant progression. You know, it is making a step, realizing it's the wrong step, trying something else, adjusting. It's always in movement. And with that comes the need to experiment, to innovate, to try new things. Here in Africa, we have the tendency to say we're going to try something as a country, and if it fails, the whole country succeeds. Sorry, if it fails, the whole country fails. But if it succeeds, then the whole country succeeds. So it's an all or nothing approach. When you have a devolved system, devolved governments can innovate themselves, can try things. And if it fails, it only fails in that locality. It doesn't fail everywhere. And if it succeeds, the other localities can still learn from it and copy it. So you get that creativity and innovation. A quick example of that, in South Africa, we for a long time had a very dodgy policy on HIV/AIDS. Maybe some of you still remember, we had a president that didn't really believe that HIV caused AIDS. It became a national policy. But we had two provinces who decided at some point, no, but we actually have our own authority over health, and we're not going to follow this national policy. We're going to do something else. And that became a very important driver of change in our national HIV/AIDS policy. So there's real benefits to allowing creativity and innovation. Democratic accountability. I don't think I need to dwell on that in this room. I think we all intuitively and from our experience know how important a driver that is. The ability for citizens, for communities to hold their local leaders accountable because they are accountable to the local community and not to the center. You know, it is a bit of a truism, but I think it's still a very important driver. Then tolerance for political diversity. Again, I think very important for the African continent. And there's a bit of a success story from South Africa on this. We have a devolved system with locally elected local governments and provinces. As you know, the African National Congress is the liberation movement that liberated South Africa, and that really positioned itself very strongly on the political scene and swept the board with election after election. Cracks are started to emerge, and now we have cities, including the city of Cape Town, the city of Johannesburg, the city of Tshwane, and one of our 9 provinces that are no longer run by the ANC. Now, the ANC doesn't like that, of course, but it tolerates it because it accepts the rule of law, and it accepts that part of having a devolved system means that different political parties may rule different parts of government. So when the city of Cape Town went to the opposition, when the city of Joburg went to a coalition, you know, some of the doomsayers were like, oh, now the sky is going to fall down. This is now when the tanks are going to run down the streets, or this is when finances will be withheld from cities, or all kinds of things will happen. None of those things happen, because over time there was a grooming of tolerance for multi-party diversity, I would argue partly as a result of our decentralized system. Of course, coupled with respect for the rule of law, that's an important element of it. Now, those are a few drivers, and I think we can use those drivers to unpack the truism of closest to the citizen a little bit more. There's, of course, also risks to mitigate, and I must do that in 3 minutes, so I'm going to be a bit crude on that. There's also the risk of history and path dependency. Our systems of decentralization are very much determined by what was left behind by the colonial forces. What did the Portuguese leave behind? What did the British leave behind? what did the French leave behind. We have, as an African continent, we have struggled to change those things. And up till today, there are very stubborn administrative cultures and practices that we've actually inherited and that we have not really fixed yet. So there's a path dependency risk to decentralization. Of course, inequality. If you empower local governments, regional governments, you give them fiscal and spending powers, and it's used unwieldy, it can create inequalities, which is why you need systems of equalization, leveling the playing field. It's a risk that must be managed. Of course, there are certain things that cannot be done at local government level. There are the obvious examples. You again have a national defense run by a locality. Everyone understands that. But also, you may not need an ambulance in every village. It's not efficient. So there's always the thing of which functions should be allocated to which level of government, and then there's a need for nuance and reflection on that. There are national or regional interests that must be preserved. We do not have a system like in Europe where the city-state existed before the nation-state. No, decentralization here will always be an issue of the national government letting go of power. That's just the way the things have worked. So we need to be mindful of that. And of course, the last one, which many of the detractors and the doomsayers, if we want to call them that, but we must also take their arguments very, very seriously because we see it all around them. I was just interviewed outside, and journalists asked the main question: this devolution, how can it work without skilled people running counties? It's simple. You can talk about all the idealism, and you have all these great ideas, and it's a great meeting, but what we see tells us a different picture. So the misuse of autonomy, maybe that's put a bit crudely, but the issues of how do we ensure that the autonomy that we so much want to be located at county or sub-regional or local level, how do we make sure that that autonomy is used effectively and is not abused? Does that mean that we need systems of oversight, that we need systems of a level of national control, some sort of insurance policy that you can devolve because you also have oversight that you can exercise? Or is it really emphasizing local democracy, that local citizens, communities hold their local leaders accountable? Does that happen enough in practice? And is our democratic systems and cultures, are they able to produce that kind of local accountability? A lot of questions that I'm sure are differently answered for each and every country represented here. But I thought with these questions, I'll get the juices flowing. Of course, there's others, and I'm sure I've not explained everything well, but I hope you understand that some of these, or agree with me, that some of these are useful drivers and risks to mitigate. And my last sentence is then really leading you to the final question, which is, it's all good and well to reflect on these questions and debate them and agree and disagree, but ultimately I want to go to the question, so what can LPSA do with that? What role can LPSA play in placing these arguments before decision makers at the right time? For example, when a country is entering a phase of, okay, we need to think about devolution because maybe that's going to be a system that we're going to adopt. Can LPSA be there to influence that debate, for example, or in any other part of the process of decision-making on either the grand scheme of devolution, constitutions, but also, and more importantly, the rollout and the implementation of decentralization. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jaap. Thank you so much. We asked you to speak about motivation, but I'd like that you also talked about potential drawbacks to decentralization. So I want to take a minute to ask if there's anybody who needs a clarification. We will come back to the question on what role can LPSA play towards the end. But anyone who has a clarification at this moment? Yes.
Yes. I'm not sure that I have well understood the last point on the misuse of autonomy. Do you mean that this misuse of autonomy is by local governments, or it's by local officials who are supposed to be accountable to the local populations?
Sure. Well, I can give you an example from South Africa. South Africa has empowered its local governments in the constitution with broad-ranging powers and fiscal powers and entitlements to central government revenue. So they're all set to do good. In practice, what we see is that many local governments fail dismally in delivering services because the administrations are inward focused and disorganized and don't have sufficiently capable staff members. The politicians are not able to fix their administrations and are too involved in their own politics. And as a result, services are not delivered. Now, I'm not saying that the whole of local government in South Africa is like that. There's unfortunately about 60 of our 257 municipalities that are in financial distress and that are functionally failing to deliver services. So that raises the question. So if you empower local government, what do you do when they fail? What does that mean? Do you then say, no, we must overlook that failure because we're on the right track and it will come right? Local democracy will fix it over time because citizens will hold councillors accountable, and over time, local democracy will fix all those inadequacies. But go and tell that to a resident who's sitting in his or her own sewage. That's not a, so it is a question for us. And in South Africa, we've gone the route of full-blown autonomy. And now we're thinking 20 years later, my goodness, did we go too far? Because they are messing up and there's nothing we can do because they have constitutional protection. So I don't have the answer, but it's just something that I wanted to put in the mix.
Yes, it goes to the discussion we had yesterday. And on that note, actually, I want to invite Nicholas to share some insights on how decentralization can empower cities and regions as engines of national economic growth. Welcome, Nicholas.
Thanks very much. Because I was saying that to you that it's not only the local government fails, the cities, the governments, the central government, in fact, fails, and quite often they fail more than the local government. So why are we repeating ourselves? Anyway, I'm going to talk about the decentralization and local economy. And I'll then want to think about this, that it is the business of local governments to do business, to promote economic products, to create jobs, and to promote income growth at the local level. That is the argument I'm making. Very controversial, but it's important for us to begin to think about it. The economy, has always been the key deciding factor of the health of a nation. If the economy goes down, health services and all the public services that we deliver also goes down with it. So the economy is not stupid. It has always been an important sector. And over the years, the central government has been the key actor in playing both policy and actual, but also facilitating the development of it. And if you look at the economy in terms of, distribution or production, trade, agri, industry, GDP growth, these are all economy. And the outcome of it is that it promotes the welfare. Once the economy grows, the whole of the welfare and everybody is happy. Now, if we come down to decentralization of it, and we always say is the sharing of the responsibilities of the states to local governments or to non-state actors, NGOs, and the private sector. So that is the role that decentralization comes to play, that part of the responsibilities of the state that is led by the central government is transferred. And we have always said that is a process, and that involves either the political side or fiscal side or administrative side. And all with the idea that it will lead to improvement in services. So if we accept that, what happened? You change it from 15 all of a sudden to 11. Okay, good. So, so all of a sudden, we're talking about the decentralization as a process. So let's transfer the political, let's transfer some fiscal, let's transfer with the idea that it will lead to improvement in service delivery. But we haven't asked ourselves, why is the economy not transferred as well? And if decentralization is a process, then why haven't we questioned when this political services, fiscal, don't lead to improvement in the economy at a local level? Now the question is, if cities, with the GDP of cities like Nairobi, Accra, Abidjan, is about 25% of the nation's GDP. And these are cities that are managed by local governments. So why is the economy not an important discussion to promote? Why have we always fixated on political decentralization, fiscal decentralization, administrative decentralization, and not thought about economic decentralization that leads to the welfare or that leads to the key sector of the economy? So the question is the economy stupid at the local level? Or are local government immaterial or inconsequential to the health of our economy at the local level? Or is it correct to say that economy is a private sector thing and the work of government is not to do what the private sector is doing? Is that the case? And then we go back to Musgrave and Musgrave's argument on public finance theory. Now, the question I'm asking is, how can decentralization be a key agenda for promoting local economic development? That brings me to the issue of local economic development, which is a development strategy that is led by local government, and it brings together the private sector and all of that. I think we know the concept. The local economic development is both a process and an outcome. As a process, local government brings together the private sector and to lead and coordinate local economic development. As an outcome, it should lead to income growth. It should lead to local products. That's when you go to a supermarket, you should be able to pick a flower and be proud that this came from my district. If you go to a shop, your wayside shop, you should be able to say that this is a water bottled in my district and I'm attached, you feel that this is coming from my area. Because when a local economy is developing, then the people feel attached to it. As an outcome, then the jobs. And currently, the single most intractable challenge our government are facing is how to fix livelihoods for the teeming youth. If we can provide all the water, health services, and the youth and the young people don't get jobs at the local level, they move to the city and become a burden to another. So why is local economic development not a key, something to motivate local government to fight for? But it's always the centralized initiative. And this is where I want to talk about the case of Ghana and what the Institute tried to push. In 2019, I moved from my almost 15 years or 30 years in The Hague back to head the Institute of Local Government Studies. And that was also the time that the government had thought about being in opposition. They had promised to create jobs at the center, at the local level. And yet, once they came to power, they look at how can we do this? So government decided the policy of one district, one factory, meaning that for all the 261 districts, government was going to facilitate the creation of manufacturing companies, going to support them so that jobs will be created at a local level. Instead of devolving that responsibility, no, the center took it. Because the idea is that economy is the role of the central government. So government on its own supported a number of private initiatives and established factories. As at today, they have about 296 of these factories in 134 districts. Now, the local government, instead of taking this initiative and support, they sat back. And in Ghana, this is an issue that people, both within government and also opposition, are against, because they think it is not the business of government to do business. That we failed in the 1960s and 70s through import substitution industries. So why all of a sudden government is supporting productive sectors? So that's not the business of government. And local government had also looked at it and done the same thing. So I tried to push for a new dimension of decentralization. I said, let's focus on a local economic development. Let's push it. Government had then developed a local economic development policy, but it didn't want to implement it because the local government either don't have the capacity or still have the skepticism that that is not their business. They will be better off with providing solid waste collection and trying to get some schools and that thing provided than going into a venture which they have no capacity to them. So even though the policy was there and support was there, at best what they could do was to train people in enterprises and organize business forums and talk about it. But to invest or to give them startup capital, that is the work of the private sector. And so many of the young people and the poor will come to forums like this and listen to the ideas, but that is the end. And then we call again another meeting, they will come and listen. But how to take it forward, that is supposed to be somebody's business. And at the end, government doesn't do it, the private sector also don't do it because they don't have that's to do it, the motivation to do it. And nobody does it. And unemployment is becoming a major issue at our local level. So we decided that we would take the initiative. So at the Institute, we did a nationwide training of what we call the next generation local economic development, which moves away from the old school of local economic development, where it's based on the issue of enabling environment. And so what you hear is that, oh, government needs to only create enabling environment and the private sector will come automatically at the local level. What is enabling environment? Or is to organize business forums, is to provide some support. And if roles, let's maintain the roles. And if it is training, let's organize. So enabling environment then became a slogan. Anything government has to take action, we are providing enabling environment. But when you ask local government, what enabling environment can you do? You don't have the land, so you cannot provide land as an incentive. You cannot provide tax rebates. You cannot do anything. So what is enabling environment that you are providing? So at the end, it is some policy, but nothing is done. So we did a training to change local government mindset and the attitude about business, trying to make entrepreneurial skills out of bureaucrats. It wasn't an easy thing, but we did a training with the support of the Dutch, with the support of the Canadians nationwide, brought in the idea that government can do business with enterprises using the special purpose vehicle, the same way as we do public-private partnerships in agriculture. So we started doing this training. We organized breakfast meetings, did a lot of studies, used breakfast meetings with the ministries and the sectors to change the mindset. 2 years after, they still don't want to. Why? Because they were the fear of the unknown. And so left to their own devices, let's stick to what we do all the time. So training, workshops, and I still no economic activity. Out of frustration and the fear that, this will not work, we decided to write proposals as an institute, because at a point through our research, we became like, apart from our education, a think and do tank for the Ministry of Local Government. So new ideas we shape for local government. So I said, look, we can do this, let's pilot this. So with the support of the Dutch, we got grants to test the next generation local economic development with the young people. And that is what we're doing now. Then out of this, in fact, we are getting the Swiss also to say, if it is possible that you can team local government officers to think entrepreneur and to work as public-private partnership. So take, for instance, agriculture. Don't just train the farmers. Support them with good seedlings. For instance, I'll give you an example. In the northern part of Ghana, we used to bring tomatoes to the south. During COVID, and after some time, the farmers were not, the market women were going to Burkina Faso to bring tomatoes. So we asked the local government, why are the farmers doing this? They said, well, the tomatoes we are bringing from the north get rotten by the time they reach the south. They rather go to Burkina because they have good variety. So he said, why are we not supporting them to import that seedlings and help the local farmers? Oh, no, that's not the work of local government. Local government doesn't have to buy seedlings and good seeds for farmers. We only have to educate them. Then it's the private sector to buy own seedlings. So with the new next generation local community development, local government buys seedlings, provide to the farmers, give them hands-on, support them with branding of their products, and export that outside the district. With that, you are creating jobs. You are supporting practical action. With fish farming, you give the young people fingerlings. You help them setting up their fish pond. You bring them to the time when they are ready. And you form cooperatives. So local government is being proactive on this. Unlike the past local community development activity where local government thinks, oh, that is the work of enterprises. And I'm saying this to bring it to a conclusion, that there is a political economy dimension to why local governments are not interested in local economic activities. Why? Because they think jobs, products are private sector, or that is a private good. And through other discussions, I've seen definitions of decentralization, bringing government and services closer to people. I haven't heard anybody say bringing economy, jobs, income growth to the people, because that is the work of the center. So for local public sector alliance, this is something for us to think about. We need a radical shift. All the ideas about services are good. We'll keep it. But for over century or say decades of talking about decentralization and local, I should be finishing soon. Talking about decentralization and service provision. My argument is that the economy is not stupid. Economy is key, and it should be part of the conversation. As a process, the mindset of local government officers need to be changed from being bureaucrats and regulators of services to actually entrepreneurs. Not all of them, but the professionalism that comes into local government is such that this has to change. And I feel that if we are going to step into this new arena of making or advocating for deepening decentralization, to deepening, then the sector, both intergovernmental and intersectoral, should be part. And services is one of the sectors. Economy is so important. And that is what I want to make the argument. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. I think you're raising quite interesting points there. And I think it's a similar problem we're having in Kenya, where we're talking about, the counties just want to develop policies and domesticate policies, but not actually deliver the services in childcare, for instance. That childcare provision is being done by the civil society and not just, not by the counties themselves. So thank you so much for that, especially those practical examples. And that actually leads us to the last motivator that Anna Min is going to be looking at. How do we localize? How can localizing services and development be a motivator for disrupting centralized system? Welcome, Anne.
Thank you. I hope this works. The discussion is getting really interesting, and it aligns very well also with UN Habitat's mandate to promote socially and environmentally sustainable towns and cities. And also, just to say very briefly on Habitat in general, we're the focal point for all urbanization and human settlement matters within the UN system. So I will speak a little bit on localization of public services and development outcomes to achieve inclusive and effective development. And maybe to set the scene a little bit, although I'm sure you're all very familiar with some of these statistics already from before, but Africa is expected to have the world's fastest growing urban population over the next 30 years. And overall, the population is expected to increase by about 60% between 2010 and 2050, with the urban population tripling to 1.23 billion people. Around 2030, Africa's collective population will become 50% urban. And the generally weak capacity of government bodies to plan for and manage the urban growth in Africa has led to the rise of inequalities and the increasing prevalence of informality. Most African cities must cope with the situation of having close to 30% of the population living on income levels below subsistence, with an average of 70% of residents living in informal settlements with poor access to basic services such as water and sanitation. Only about 55% of Africa's urban residents have access to basic sanitation services, and only 47% have access to hand washing facilities. Overall, around 69 million African urban residents have no access to safe water services. At the same time, the unbalanced power relations are a common phenomenon everywhere and very prevalent also in Africa. They manifest in the negotiations and contestations of urban spaces, which undermine the core functions of institutions through exclusion, where some individuals or groups are systematically sidelined from policy decisions that affect their interests, through capture, where influential groups can capture policies to make them serve their narrow interests to block competition altogether, and clientelism, where benefits are exchanged in return for political support. And just to give an example from a relatively recent guide that we developed on multi-level governance and health equity, we found out that poor governance practices such as corruption actually affect the universal health coverage with severe consequences for the access, quality, equity, and efficiency of health services, with an estimated $500 billion in public health spending is lost globally to corruption every single year. And these lost funds would be actually sufficient to achieve the universal health coverage. So extensive governance reforms are really critical and needed for effective delivery of affordable housing, social services, and urban infrastructure. When we look at the urbanization rates, we have to also realize that about 50% of the building stock required in developing countries by 2050 is yet to be built. So this is a huge opportunity. And the decisions on how these housing gaps will be filled have significant implications and opportunities for climate, for society, for the economy, as well as health. Given the diversity of the African continent, governance reforms must be context-specific. There's really no one-size-fits-all, and it's not really a ticking-the-box exercise. And the challenge of African urban sustainability calls for a focus on people-centered cities based on multi-level governance, cooperation, collective action, and solidarity. In line with the SDGs and the New Urban Agenda, urban governance should be participatory, consensus-oriented, accountable, transparent, responsive, effective, efficient, equitable, and an inclusive process that ensures all urban residents reap the benefits of urbanization. The framework should reduce mismanagement, ensure the views of minorities are considered, and that the voices of the most vulnerable in society are also heard with the decision-making processes. And if we look at decentralization, the New Urban Agenda recognizes that local governments are responsible for the provision of most services in accordance with the principles of subsidiarity, which implies that public functions and powers should be exercised by the institution as close as possible to the citizen. In the African context, most countries did not have the tradition of strong local governments in the colonial or early post-independence eras. And this shift towards decentralization only started some 20 plus years ago, driven by the recognition that improved urban management, decentralization, and local democracy are all interlinked and mutually reinforcing. However, the implementation of decentralization has been very uneven and partial, and sometimes has led to local governments that are weak, disorganized, inadequately trained and staffed, and often also under-resourced relative to the new range of responsibilities they're expected to take on. As Nicholas was mentioning earlier, we have also example based on a recent study, the level of decentralization of spatial planning, for example, between the central, this is a different one. The central government and the local level is 53% in sub-Saharan Africa, which is relatively low compared to the land-rich developed countries, where all the spatial planning functions are devolved to the municipal level of the government. To contextualize a little further, Niger State, for example, based on a governance study of UN Habitat, has a decentralized planning process according to the legal framework. However, there are no local planning authorities, so all decisions concerning urban planning are still made at the central level. It's encouraging, however, to see that a growing number of African countries are implementing legislative reforms to address these issues. The key message is that the law must be effective by assigning mandates that align with the capacities available to local governments, with the potential for incremental upgrades as capacities improve. It's really not advocated to adopt sort of a best practice from some other country and just think that it will work for us. It never does. It really has to be context specific. Also, local authorities must be accountable for their actions in a transparent and predictable manner, ensuring they are answerable to the citizens. Considering the fragility of Africa's external financial inflows to global economic shocks, African nations should also prioritize securing more reliable local revenue streams. This is what Nicholas was talking about also. And the level of fiscal decentralization is still very low in many African countries, where the local governments control less than 5% of the national public expenditure. Fiscal decentralization reforms can offer an avenue to simultaneously bolster government coffers, improve the impact of government spending, capture the uncollected tax revenue spillage, and augment taxation's prominent role as a source of development financing. Overall, the success of jurisdictional and fiscal decentralized autonomy hinges on meeting several preconditions, including the improvements in public service delivery, particularly in allocative efficiency and enhanced government accountability. If we look at the multi-level governance and inclusion side, to manage the power asymmetries, the new urban agenda proposes that first, for optimum delivery of urban services and savings on scarce resources, the national-local government interface must be strong with proper interinstitutional hierarchy and coordination. A real-time collaborative multi-level governance requires stepping out of our comfort zones. Working simultaneously and together on urgent urban challenges could involve, among other things, leveraging innovative coordination instruments such as integrated development plans for coherent and synergetic outcomes. Another effective way of achieving strong multi-level governance is ensuring that all segments of the population are involved in the management of urban areas. And the meaningful participation promotes the interests of all, including the most vulnerable, and it's ultimately helpful in facilitating the enjoyment of human rights. Involving the urban actors in the decision-making processes, formulation of laws, the plans, and so on, generates crucial buy-in. It improves the quality of the product by incorporating multiple perspectives, as well as increases the likelihood of compliance. Because people always, they like to, if they've been part of the decision-making process, they are happy to also then actually comply by what has been ruled or what is the outcome. To improve public participation, all spheres of government must design and implement participatory methodologies that guarantee meaningful participation, that is not limited to just sharing information or consulting, but that allows citizens to actually contribute to the actual definition of urban governance. These can be achieved through mechanisms that allow citizens, including vulnerable groups, to provide feedback, dialogue with local authorities, contribute to the allocation of resources with participatory budgeting, take the initiative to propose and implement interventions of urban development. I'd like to also mention a few words on strengthening the urban and rural linkages. I think it's quite meaningful for the African context. The UN Habitat really underscores the significance of integrated urban and territorial planning to close the development disparities between urban and rural areas. And this effective localization approach addresses the specific needs of both settings, fostering equitable growth and ensuring rural areas are not neglected. And these strategies are pivotal for achieving inclusivity and have been recognized for their role in smoothing the urban-rural continuum. For example, the guiding principles and framework for action to advance integrated territorial development, which was initiated by UN Habitat, advocates for the alignment of urban and rural development. And in Cameroon, these guidelines have facilitated the integration of agricultural initiatives with the urban market development, bridging the urban-rural gap and enhancing market access for rural farmers. Touching a little bit also on what was discussed earlier. This linkage not only boosts the economic opportunities for rural producers, but directly connects them to the urban markets, and it also ensures urban areas have consistent access to agricultural products, creating a reciprocal economic relationship. Then finally, I'd like to point my only slide that I was given is actually some of our recent tools that we've developed related to governance or some of the other topics that we thought might be of interest. And there's actually a second slide which has the link. You can access all of these tools online, free of charge, of course. And maybe I can just mention a few, since I think I have a few minutes left. So, for example, to respond to the complex crises such as the climate change and health pandemics, UN Habitat has developed 2 normative guidelines on multi-level governance for effective urban climate action in the Global South, and a guide on leveraging multi-level governance approaches to promote health equity. They are repositories of knowledge and resources on the multi-level governance strategies and tools that governments at all levels can utilize for emergency health preparedness and climate action. We have also supported 10 countries in initiating climate legal and institutional reforms, especially to mobilize strong and ambitious climate action through multi-level governance using the urban law module, which is part of the Law and Climate Change Toolkit that has been developed together with the United Nations Environment Programme, UNFCCC, and the Commonwealth Secretariat. Finally, there's the enabling meaningful participation in spatial planning processes, which demonstrates that there's really no one-size-fits-all approach to public participation, but it features a step-by-step process perspective on how to engage the public and civil society, and has series of mechanisms that can be adapted and aggregated in the form of policy mixes that can better suit the local context and resources available. And finally, since urban challenges facing cities now and in the future also do not really recognize the jurisdictional boundaries, we're supporting metropolises to pool resources and expertise through metropolitan governance. And we have voluntary metropolitan reviews that provide innovative mechanisms to address the challenges that metropolises face in the implementation of the SDGs. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give her a hand. Right on time. Thank you so much for bringing those aspects of localizing development, issues of inclusion and public participation, but also effective and efficient public sectors. For now, I will hand over to Jamie, who is going to be our lead discussant for this section. And welcome.
I'm going to give myself 5 minutes. Is that okay?
Thanks. I wanted to pick up on some of the themes that I heard as I was listening as a member, not as the executive director, but as a member of the Sub-Saharan Africa Working Group. I heard Jaap describe a number of motivations, and we do have in the packet, we printed the fact sheet that guides, why decentralize and why be careful with decentralization. I heard Nick make a very strong argument that, yeah, we can focus on health and education, but what really matters is livelihoods, right? And economic productivity is the basis of whatever we do. People care about their jobs, about money, about being able to send their kids to better schools and earning so that they have a better life. And so if local governments can play a role there, that might be a really good motivator. And of course, then shared with us how urbanization is critical. And as people move to cities, there are lots of opportunities for more effective multi-level governance and decentralization to play a positive role. Those are the things I heard. But here is, I think, the key question, and it goes back to what Jaap had at the bottom of his slide, was what is going to carry the day? Because politically, central governments don't like giving up, is my experience. I don't know what you, I know some of you have had this experience. Presidents don't like giving up power. Cabinet ministers don't like giving up functions. They don't like giving up their budgets. If this were Shark Tank and the president of your country would be sitting right here, right? Which of these pitches is going to sell him or her? Do we have any female presidents in Africa? Yes, Tanzania has a her. Excellent. If Mama President would be sitting right there, right? What is going to carry the day for Tanzania to really say, okay, you've got me sold, right? Because decentralization is an illogical reform. No one likes to give up power. I'm only going to do it if there is something in it for me in the end, right? So that is what what is in my mind. And between over tea, I overheard Nick mention, KK's presentation was great because I didn't realize Kenya was Big Bang. If we don't do Big Bang, the politicians are going to muck it up, right? So how do we get through with these narratives? What is going to make the pitch? And then maybe the secondary one is, if this were Shark Tank and we would have Bill Gates sitting here, which pitch is going to make it? Or FCDO or whichever UNDP or whatever the big bosses that actually control the direct resources, Mo Ibrahim, if he's here, who is going to buy the pitch? What is really going to carry the day? That is what I would be very keen to hear. Which of these things for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years is going to really sway the debate on decentralization? Because the topic has been in decline for the past 20 years. So which of these, that's a question, not rhetorical. I don't have the answer. I wish I did. That's why I came, that's why we are here together. So which of these pitches is going to make the day? Oh, with a minute to spare. Floor is open. Asante.
Sorry, mine is just a comment. I think I got a bit lost when Nicholas was talking about the failure to decentralize the economy. And I listened to him for at length, trying to sort of understand what exactly he's talking about. My specialization is fiscal decentralization. So my background is law. I struggled a lot trying to understand economic stuff, writing on fiscal decentralization, especially focusing on Kenya. So I thought perhaps it was the economics of it which was actually losing me. But at the same time, towards the end of his comments about local economic development and the role of local governments in furthering the economy, I just realized it's one of those challenges that I've observed also coordinating the African School on Decentralization for the last 4 or 5 years. And that is the whole issue of context that Anne was very big on. That even as we come together focusing on decentralization in Africa, one of the key things that we need to understand, we're not looking at one model of decentralization in Africa. we're looking at very many models, very many variations, very many names, very many levels. For example, South Africa has 3, Kenya has 2 levels, other countries have various levels. We use different names: decentralization, federalism, local government. And the challenge usually is that when we're talking about local government, we tend to think we're talking about the same thing for each country. That when you're talking about the ideal situation of where we need to move local governance to, is like we are starting from the same baseline, which we usually don't. So the challenge has been in terms of the African School of Decentralization, you find that towards the end, the students, or rather the participants, they're practitioners, right? They're kind of lost because I'm trying to use the model of my country, trying to pin it towards those ideals which you're actually recommending. I'm seeing a lot of variances. I'm seeing a lot of things which you're saying which don't exist in my country. So I think it's really important to also sort of understand that we are looking at different models, the different levels of decentralization, different levels of fiscal decentralization, different levels of political decentralization. So as we speak towards our contribution to local governance, obviously when Rose was speaking about the East African Local Governments Association, he tried to insert county governments there. It's just an indication that as much as we're looking at local governance, the variations in terms of the models, the variations in terms of the powers that actually are conferred, and various local governments across Africa play different roles even in local economic development. When you look at, for example, Kenya, the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics undertook a gross county product survey in terms of what is each county's contribution towards the GDP in Kenya. So you realize that when you look at counties in Kenya, they have a role to play in local economic development. But when we speak about local governments in Africa as general, as not having a role in local economic development, we run the risk of also losing, the rest of us. So I thought it would be important for us to also understand that even as we continue with these conversations, that the different contexts that we need to also have at the back of our mind as we look at Africa and African and the practice in Africa.
I thought once we meet here, we understand the fundamentals. I think there's a reason we call expert group meeting. So I was not expecting that we will go to the basics of the different types of decentralization, defining that, because we conceptually, there is clarity on what decentralization means, what fiscal decentralization means, what political decentralization means, different types of decentralization. So we are not going to go into discussions about conceptual definitions here. I think what governments do, it's not only what is written or what, I think it's about what actually they do. So when you talk about county governments, you measure the GDP of a county and you said it is 2 billion. If you ask what is the contribution of the local government or the county government towards that 2 billion, is it that they invested their money into increasing the agriculture production in the districts, or they supported subsidies to farmers? Those are the things we want to hear. So if you have a GDP of Nairobi to be, so much, and I'm happy that UN Habitat has started doing something. I just checked, and they have done the GDP of all of these big cities. Now the question is, we can take credit for it, but if we ask, what did we contribute fiscally? We will find wanting. And so when I say local government, here I mean sub-national government. It could be regional, it could be sub-district or whatever. I'm talking about sub-national government. And it could be a federal system, but we are still talking about sub-national government. So that is so I know that there are differences, but the fundamental is that it's sub-national government. Yeah.
If I get the question right or the comment right, is, and without having specifically said it, there are some county governments, I think, but my Kenyan colleagues please correct me, that have been quite proactive in creating livelihoods for their citizens. And thanks. And so there might be examples where that is the case. I think what Nicholas's point was in Ghana, that's not the case, and it might be a good thing to do that. And that might be, right, we're talking about motivators. So the question is not so much, is it happening, is it not happening, but really, is that the motivator? Because that might be a very good motivator that some governors have hit on. Then the question for discussion here is, those governors, did they get reelected? Because if not, then it's not a very good motivator. You can share your experiences here about that, you know, during lunch. That's coming up soon. But I think that the point, my understanding of Nick's point was, in many places, these services of creating livelihoods fall through the cracks because top-down government tends to be very top-down. Kenya, you may not realize as a Kenyan, has really made a leap over the past 10 years. And the rest of the continent is not with you yet. And maybe this is one of these places where you might say, look, this has changed, right? Maybe I'm reading too much into your comment. I'll let you discuss over lunch, go sit with Nick, right? But I think that my lesson here is you're saying, in fact, this is happening in Kenya. It is a good thing.
Yeah.
Nick hasn't been here since the expressway was built. All right. Now he's back. He's going, damn, stuff is happening in Kenya. And maybe the short conclusion of that conversation at the end of lunch, you report back, is to say, this is a really good motivator because people have jobs. And, you know, that might be one of the things. Whereas, you know, USAID says, oh, bring government closer to the people. People fall asleep. Maybe, you know, and it was intended, Kenya was intended as a political reform, but maybe it's the economic reform that's carrying the day. I don't know. I'm just American. What do I know? Right? But those were that was, I think, what was getting lost between your comments.
Yes.
But
yes,
again,
absolutely.
you know, sit with lunch, talk,
Absolutely.
and then, you know, we're all going to learn from your lunch conversation.
Good. I think it helps absolutely, and I think Kenya, and maybe let me share that the Ghana experience. We used to be the pacesetters of decentralization in Africa. Countries came to learn from us, but because we never devolved or we never decentralized democracy, what it means is that our mayors are still appointed. We've never had a situation where a mayor is appointed. So everything is a top-down thing. The president appoints 1/3 of the local councillors. President appoints the mayor, appoints 1/3. And about, let's say, only about 3% of the national revenue is actually go to the local level. So everything is centralized. In fact, we are re-centralizing a lot. On local economy, I mean, we haven't even provided or build our capacity to provide basic services that are needed. Sanitation and solid waste are paid for by the central government. That is the extent. So you are lucky because you devolved. And that's why this morning when I listened to KK, I was surprised that Kenya went to the big bank because I knew only Indonesia had a big bank. But for Kenya, now listen to the story, that was something that helped you. In 2019, Ghana nearly had that opportunity. We were going to go to a referendum to elect, to decide whether we should elect mayors. In the last minute, the president called it off. If that had happened, then local government would have given the power to do so many things. But today, no. And so it's something that you are taking for granted. Oh, it's because you have had that evolution. And we are practicing decentralization by deconcentration. So that's the difference between what you are doing and what we have more conversation.
Thank you very much. And yeah, of course, to commend Ghana to have been one of the countries in Africa that really was setting the pace. Sentimentally, I am very much connected to that because my very first professional working visit was to study decentralization on Ghana, 1998, with a Malawian delegation of ministers and other government officials. I think decades later, I agree that there's so much that Ghana can lay in. But I think the comparison between Ghana and Kenya is interesting in so many ways. And when I listen to the motivation of decentralization and devolution in Kenya, I'm wondering whether there are certain things we can reflect on further. Because at least as an outsider, one gets an impression that one of the big pushes of decentralization and devolution in Kenya is the fact that at a political level, there's a recognition that the country is divided, ethnically speaking, geographically speaking. And also that there are so many local political actors that everyone wants power. And the only way to accommodate is to create opportunities for that. And hence making counties more attractive as compared to just being a member of parliament. All that sounds good, but it also brings in other challenges. For instance, to what extent, and maybe our Kenyan colleagues can help us better reflect and understand that, to what extent has this been also a curse in the sense that because the nature of power politics hasn't significantly changed, the same challenges you find at a national level politics would manifest themselves at local level. Talk about corruption, talk about patronage and other things. What mechanisms are being taken at a local level to counter what otherwise has been so endemic at a national level? Secondly, if the motivating factors from Kenya would be anything to go by, then I think the intergovernmental relations become very critical in that regard. And again, I think what lessons are coming out of Kenya, therefore, insofar as the relationships between central and local level arrangements are concerned. I think I would be very keen to hear more about that.
I wanted to make a bit of a lawyerly comment, if I may, and talk about the Big Bang approach. So Kenya is a Big Bang approach. South Africa is a Big Bang approach. But I want to sort of nuance why you can call it a Big Bang approach, because we have many more constitutions on the continent that are actually Big Bang constitutions. Zambia is one. Uganda was the first Big Bang constitution. Ethiopia, in many respects, is a Big Bang constitution. But why are they not a Big Bang devolution country? Because the element of the rule of law was missing. Because the reason why Kenya is moving at the pace as it is, the reason why South Africa is moving at the pace as it is, because the decision makers, parliaments, executives know against the constitutional provisions on devolution, ultimately there is a court that can say no to you. Now in Uganda, there's no court that has yet said no to Museveni on devolution. In Zambia, I'm not sure. The Zambians were very skeptical when I raised that issue. In Ethiopia, it's not on the cards at all. So it's a bit of a lawyerly comment, but the strength of devolution does also lie in that, does it have teeth? You know, and at some point, do you only rely on politicians being convinced by LPSA, or are there checks and balances in the system that we can also insist on? And a quick question on the LED issue, if I may. Just you know, in South Africa, we called our local government system developmental local government. Beautiful, beautiful term to move away from the concept of, you know, local government is what did they say? Roads, rubbish, and rates. That's it. That's local government. No, we say developmental. I think that's the point that you were making. So we did that, and then 20 years later, we have all the issues that I discussed, problems, and you know, governments are not performing, national government not supporting enough. So now the policy is back to basics. That was the previous policy, back to basics. So how can we avoid that? That, you know, the failures of local government, when you speak to businesses, they say, yes, I know LED, and I know my municipality must promote entrepreneurial, and we want training, and we want seeding money, and we want local governments to do beautiful things, but please just first fix the potholes because my trucks are breaking on your roads. So that's my conundrum. LED versus sort of, just the basics of we need service delivery because that will actually promote the economy. And I'm sure the truth is somewhere in between. Sorry. Thanks.
Just a contribution to what Augustine has spoken about. And I know this will come again on Wednesday, yeah, in a big way. Yes, there could be questions, yes. The Big Bang, then what is the cost, what's the burden then to the country? Before the 2010 Constitution, those exactly were the questions. And I remember at that time working with the Local Government Association. Questions were, can you give us evidence? We need data to say that this is not going to work against the nation, development, tribalism, ethnicism, all this conflict. That this will not be another cause to create, kingdoms, fiefdoms, a lot of questions that led us to go to the banana and orange way, if you remember that referendum, which flopped in a big way. Then went to the drawing board again. Who else do we bring on the table to advise, to clarify? Who are these research institutions to give us the correct information, the data, to run around the country, to educate and get information and all that? And yes, this question, some of them still remain, or the issue of corruption. Okay, strained relations, which you always see, especially around the issue of division of revenue, the issue of equitable development, the issue of nepotism, the issue of, conflict across, the national government, county governments, intra-government relations, really strained. But you see, the Constitution actually envisaged such. And that's why you see there's a full clause article on public participation, that before you pass a specific law, there must be public participation. Sometimes what happens is just the reality that not everything that really is said is actually put into the law and all that. And I think the last 2 days, I'm sure you have been following our news on the issue of taxation and public participation. And people trying to talk about the finance bill last year. We had public participation, but not everything was incorporated, and therefore we also don't trust on this. But these are things that are there. IGRTC is amongst the intergovernmental relations institutions that are put in place to facilitate implementation of devolution, taking over after the transition authority. And in a way has tried to facilitate such when you have conflicts amongst, the executive and the legislature at the county level, they try to come in. We have also other intergovernmental relations institutions that have been established deliberately by the Constitution to see to it that they address such issues. The National Coordinating Summit, which is actually chaired by the president himself, is one of those. That whenever there are issues, every time, a quarter or biannually, there's a schedule that they can actually be deliberated and dispensed of at that level. Another very powerful one, where actually the current president was chairing previously as a deputy president, is the Intergovernmental Budget and Economic Council. When it comes to finances, to go the shareable revenue, it must be deliberated by IBEC. That's why sometimes you find there's a stalemate. And studies are always done. The CRA is another one, the Commission on Revenue Allocation. Before it does anything, every year there's a research. They conduct a survey trying to look at the formula. Does this still apply in this current regime? Do we need to make amendments? What must be the consideration? What is the formula? So those were envisaged and created by the Constitution. The control of budget in charge of finances, that before this happens, then you must have met this before we disburse the funds to the counties. So those institutions created by the Constitution are supposed to have been actually are there to provide such cushions, including addressing the issue of ADR, which IGRTC is actually in the forefront of doing. What we see still happening, Senate, let me not forget to mention the Senate, is seen as a protector of the counties. That whenever there's a discussion or deliberation on county issues, it is in the forefront to defend it and to see to it that the interests of the county governments are actually taken care of, including and especially and most importantly on shareable revenue. What I think is coming up is now the enforcement bit, implementation, ensuring that the provisions are followed to the letter. I think that's a discussion that must come up. Sorry? Not before. Actually, we can postpone to Wednesdays, okay? So those are the issues. And then the court processes. 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17, the Council of Governors was always in court because of the issue of clawback. Why are we doing this? You don't agree, we discuss, have discussion, deliberation, we debate, we argue. We hit a snag, we go to court. And most of these cases.
If I may interrupt though, Judy, that is the point that Yap was making.
Exactly.
That in Kenya, for some reason, and I don't know because I'm not a lawyer, when he mentions economic stuff, I get worried. When law brings up, you should be worried when I speak of law. But that was a really good observation. That is, the constitution in Kenya is being followed and it has allowed that space. Whereas, as Yap mentioned, there were Big Bang constitutions that didn't result in Big Bang because the laws are not being enforced. And in fact, and this is, now I'm going to sit next to Yap over lunch because I have a question for him. And it's also maybe a question for the Kenyan colleagues, because under the old constitution, you had local authorities and they were not doing their job, but the courts didn't stand up for them the same way that the counties are. And so, again, I don't know the answer to this, but often Kenya is criticized that the counties are too large, right? They're too far from the people, blah, blah, blah. That is what's being said. Sometimes they're not even classified as local governments, but as regional governments. But maybe that was a very important ingredient in giving them so much power that when they actually said, no, you must evolve, devolution actually happened. Whereas under the old system, local governments were so small, even the courts ignored them. I don't know. But I think, and I do think on time, we want to have lunch, we want to have conversations. We're here for 3 days. We're not going to settle this before lunch, but I think it is a really good question to ask and go back to the question, what motivates it and what are the ingredients? And how do you get from that ambition, the Constitution, Zambia was mentioned, that's a great Constitution. Why is it not being implemented? Why not? Well, clearly there was something that local governments can't go to court and say, or they won't go to court, or they dare not, or they won't be powerful, they won't be heard in the same way as the Kenyan did. So the motivation was stronger here. The dynamics were stronger. The point was made. Sometimes we have to explain to Americans, there is no country called Africa. There's, right, no one size fits all. So I think that is really part of the question. Now, we're going to have a session tomorrow, even before Wednesday. In Wednesday, we're going to learn so much about Kenya, but on Tuesday afternoon, we're going to try to pull some of these things together as well. I did before, Steve, you had a short comment? Because there was, I do think we should go to lunch and we'll continue talking. Don't worry, we're not going to leave. I know maybe some of you have safari plans. I don't know. I hope not.
Well, yeah, I have a very quick comment, and I know it's very difficult to stand between, the lunch and people. Yeah, but I think I've picked very interesting concepts here around inclusivity, public participation, local capacity, and all this. And when we talk about decentralization or localization, I think from our perspective, the question that we always ask is, it's decentralization or localization from whose perspective, right? Most times when you ask, for example, the government's, their concept is their perspective on decentralization or localization is very different from development partners like ourselves. And also when you ask communities, it's the perspective is also very different, you know. So I think that and along the way with the process of decentralization and localization, we've also left communities behind, you know, yet they're very, very important stakeholders when it comes to these conversations. Normally we think that doing public good is enough, even when we don't include communities to be part of these conversations. So I think moving forward, maybe LPC and partners, part of your focus area should be around how do we ensure that community voices and CSO voices are really included into these conversations so that we have sustainable decentralization or localization processes. And we'll be happy to continue sharing our insights and our perspectives as MCLD throughout the workshop. Thanks.
To the speakers. I think probably the session brought up more questions than answers, but I think we have 3 days to discuss this and the conversation will continue in the afternoon. Questions on how do we deepen constitutionalism, how do we do the motivators vary from country to country based on where you're standing, as Steve is saying, does it matter? The history of the country and the political economy of the country. I think very interesting conversations. I want to say thank you to the speakers and thank you to everyone who's contributed to that session.